Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting Advisor Shares Alpha Nooner. Today, we are excited to be joined again by Todd Harrison. Back again. It's been a little bit of time away from the space, but excited to spend some time digging into the current cannabis landscape as we are midway roughly through the summer. There's been a lot of activity in the cannabis space that's returned, so excited to spend some time kind of parsing through it. A good reminder, if you're out there and you're joining us, I would give you the reminder that if you have questions or comments, you're always welcome to put them in the chat. We'll try to get to them towards the end. But just opening that up as well. With all that said, Todd, thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate it. How has your time away been? How's time being back? How has it been? How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, Mac. Never a shortage of news or drama in our space. I took a little time the 4th of July week just to unplug, and then came back into what was an exciting week. There's been a lot going on. Yeah, let's chew through it. There's a lot to talk on.
Yeah, that's a great point. So maybe let's start with kind of where some of the excitement has been lately. I know there's been a lot of talk on kind of the new administration and kind of communication between the industry and the new administration. Would love to start kind of on the geez Louise. We were just talking earlier. I had a Celsius and it has already started to get
Bandy.
Yes, Pam Bondi.
I like Palm Bandy better. Yes, so I appreciate you starting off with this because I didn't even realize that this was a thing until I realized that this was a thing. And in full context, I have been dealing with some physical issues, back issues that had me on my back for like 4 days, and some family stuff that I needed to attend to. So it's been the definition of multitasking. But with regard to Pam Bondi, a few things. Number one, I've been on the advisory board of the Nassau County Police Department for the last 13 years. I've been very active in helping to raise them money to build a new training facility. They're one of the top police departments in the nation, and have been very active in those endeavors. Found out late last week that Pam Bondi would be cutting the ribbon at the new training facility that we've been working for the last decade plus on. I was very excited about that. We talked a lot about it on subs. I said, I'm explained just as I just did, this is what's going on, and I might head over there. I think I might have to make a cameo. Toward the end of the day, I think I put something out on Twitter X, and as someone thought it had to do with rescheduling. And at that point, I put a couple posts out, said, this has nothing to do with cannabis. This is about the police department thing. But I guess that wasn't enough to soothe the savage beast, and people took it as a kind of a misdirection play. But that was unintentional, if so. So if that was in fact, how people interpreted it, I apologize. Was not my intention. Anybody who knows me knows that that's not how I operate. So Pam Bondi, or Pam Bandy, as you call her. The other thing that was more important over the weekend, I ended up not going to the ribbon cutting ceremony, by the way, because I was on my back, and my wife was telling me, you're going to regret it. And as it turned out, there was no meet and greet. There would have been no opportunity for me to whisper in her ear to thank her for rescheduling or whatever it is I had up my sleeve. So that wasn't to be. But what became more sort of concerning through a cannabis lens for me was the banter over the weekend that she would be fired for her handling of the Epstein case, and there was calls for her ouster. And wouldn't that just be the most cannabis thing ever, right? Like, we finally have an AG that's lined up to purportedly move forward on rescheduling, and then she gets bumped. But that segues, I think, into what I think was more of a causal effect for the recent pullback, downdraft. This started and it goes back to I've been a little bit disenchanted with all the animus on Twitter and in the industry of late, and I don't think you need to name names to share, but every direction you look, you have people going after each other, and it's really become it's become a very unpleasant place to be for those who are still there. And so, there are people who are working behind the scenes who haven't stopped. And I'm reminded of, the axiom, either, get on board or get the fuck out of the way. Excuse my language. But I can tell you, like Weldon Angelos, for instance, he's been working on that letter that Mike Tyson signed. We've been working on that letter for 8 months at least. Uh, Pulling together the signatories and getting the language correct and making sure that that we got the right voices in front of the president to ask him to follow through on his campaign pledges. I mean, these are the things that happen behind the scenes that nobody pays attention to unless you're involved. And there's been several people involved that, I can name some of the names, whether it's Jason Wild or Charlie and Sully or, Brady. There's a handful of people who have been working, to try to build a coalition here. But suffice to say, that letter was dropped. I guess it was 2 Fridays ago or 2 Thursdays ago. It was on Friday because that was my first day of vacation, which never really happened.
Sure.
We had been working on this for such a long time, wanted to make sure it got amplified. Sure enough, and Rosie, got to mention her efforts. Mike Tyson's on Fox and Friends on Monday talking about this very passionately. And then you have all of the MAGA influencers chiming in last week talking about rescheduling, right? That's what got people excited. It wasn't, Todd Harrison meeting Palm Bandy. It was the fact that, Tyson's out there advocating, and you have all of these MAGA influencers and far right influencers supporting this. And everything that you would sort of think intuitively is that they are foreshadowing, an action, right? That's the intuitive sort of takeaway. That was my intuitive takeaway. And that, percolated. You saw real volume come into the space last week, and then, right into the Glass House raid on Thursday. And we could segue to that, but I think that had more to do with the offsides in the space than anything else. But it doesn't really matter. But I do think that people got excited. I was getting calls like, "Is this happening imminently?" I'm like, "I don't know. I have not heard that, and I'm not getting involved in trying to nail, which option series you should buy for the rescheduling trade." Right? I was trying to move the ball downfield and get a first down. But that is the context for sort of how we ended up here. We are living in it's not a material world, but we are living in an algorithmic world. And, as I just spoke, with my friend Bruce, who knows, I've been trading derivatives for 35 years. And when I get confused, I ask him, and, he goes through the math and the mechanics, and he says, getting angry at the ETF is like being angry at the stick, right? As opposed to who's thwacking you with the stick. And we've seen, it's not just cannabis. We've seen, Jane Street was brought up, was alleged to be doing this across the Indian market. So it's, this is not just about cannabis. It's just, it happens to be a vehicle that is being taken advantage of at no fault of the vehicle itself, right? So that's sort of where I land. And listen, as we'll see, and I think we'll see, and as we have seen, everything's funny when you're making money. If we do get what we expect, and we do see rescheduling, and we do see banking, and we do see Trump following through on what he said he would do, as all signs seem to point to even still, I think it's going to be a lot less venomous, but, I think we've seen a lot of people's true colors.
I think and losing money or having a tough time in a theme. And I think also some people are driven to kind of have a, devil's advocate kind of take, which is, their right to do. But yeah, I think ultimately focusing in on the people who are providing good information, good, useful insight is the ultimate way to kind of engage, I think, with those pockets of the internet on social media. Again, not taking it.
I mean, listen, people are angry. People are scared.
Of course.
I know I've made a lot of mistakes,
Sure.
but I also know that I have one person to blame for those mistakes, right? I make my own decisions. I'm a man. I'm a grown man, right? I joke a lot that 15 years ago there were 2 doors. One said cannabis, one said crypto, and I'm like, gotta go with cannabis, And here we are 15 years later, and you're like, life is some of the decisions you make, but it's not about regrets. It's just that's what happened, and here we are, and what do we do now? And there's been a lot of conversations. You were in Chicago. There's a lot of conversations on a lot of different topics. And, for what it's worth, and well, I know we got to talk about Glass House next, but, or want to talk about Glass House next, but I don't think that the script has shifted in terms of what Trump wants to do, when he wants to do it, how he wants to do it. I think he wants this issue under his belt by the time the midterms come around, and that's my thought until it's not.
That's fair. I think walking through the cannabis store though is it's a good way to kind of view it. And I think ultimately it's one of those things where the story is not yet finished and fully done. I think it's hard when you're kind of still in that grappling middle part of it ultimately. So hopefully we see it kind of come through in the same way where we saw crypto kind of mature and find its footing and find its regulation and all those things. Again, I think there are some good signs and positive signs, definitely laid by a lot of advocates in the space, by the industry itself at large. I know we had seen Village Farms up, trying to communicate with the new administration, all those things I think add up to pushing something tangible forward.
Yeah.
I do think probably
Mike DiGilio, Navy pilot, Navy captain, retired. In the White House with Ricky Williams talking to senior staffers on rescheduling. I mean, Mike's one of my favorite people in the business because there's no bullshit. What you get is what you see is what you get, and he's a straight shooter, and he's also a patriot, right? So the fact that he's in the White House as a representative of the industry, and as he says, Village Farms is very much an American company. The Canadian market is his first international market, and they've got a number of international markets behind them. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that now that they've spun off produce, that becomes a dividend rather than a drag. I just think Village Farms is particularly well positioned. I think it's probably the single safest pick right now in international cannabis, with the caveat that if things happen in Germany with telemedicine, as is being sort of bandied about, that's subject to change, but that remains to be seen.
that's fair. I think ultimately just appreciate them putting skin in the game to try to push something forward.
I think that team, soup to nuts, I'm talking about Mike, I'm talking about John Harlow, I'm talking about Anne, who's just absolutely terrific. And I saw her on the show last week for the first time. Sam, I mean, they have a terrific team. Even their operations up at Rose Biosciences, I mean, they do things the right way, and I think that's going to pay off. They worked with every province. I say province because it's Canadian, to make sure that best practices are implemented. And I think they've taken that approach internationally, working hand in glove with these governments to make sure that they can learn from past mistakes. And I think that's the type of halo effect that doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but certainly pays dividends over the long run.
That makes sense. Okay, so I know we do want to pivot topics, but just sort of final question on what we've talked about so far. Would love your perspective on, I feel like as somebody who's working behind the scenes with a lot of these different figures, whether that's Walton Angelos or whether it's people in the industry, I think you do get kind of an inside view into the work that it takes. You're not just seeing, Mike Tyson pop up and put out a letter and it sort of comes as a surprise to you. That's been hours and hours and hours and days and weeks of work.
Months
of work. Yeah.
That's all Weldon. I'm not taking his, that's Weldon, but like as my wife says, like, why do you answer him like she calls and you don't answer me like that? I'm like, because we're working on something, honey. Like, I got it. And by the way, this is going to help you too.
But that's fair. But ultimately, I mean, it takes a lot of work that you get to at least see or participate in. So you get to kind of see that longer view and sort of how things kind of come to be. How does that shape sort of because I think it is, you want to share that information and sort of background oftentimes with sort of the wider world, with what's appropriate to share. But also I know there is a balance of people who are, they can be critical or can take things in
it hasn't, but there's been nothing that's worked. Like, we haven't gotten a first down in 5 years. So I don't think people, and like, Brady and I used to talk about this, people don't realize how close we were with safe banking. What was it? I think 2022. I mean, we were literally right there when, I think that was after Axios reported, and then McConnell kind of pulled the plug on it. But, like, there's been we've gotten so close so many times. And I just feel like, I'm reminded of something that a senator said to me in DC during one of my trips to DC with Weldon a few years back. And he said, states are designed to move quicker than the federal government. The federal government is designed to move much slower. But the thing is, once the federal government begins to move, things happen quickly. Sort of counterintuitive, but I always thought of that because I feel like once things start to happen, and I was talking with Bruce McDonald before, and I like to kind of back channel my thoughts with him, and we were talking about whether we get rescheduling, like, who's going to use that as as a signal to come in versus how many people are going to use that as exit liquidity and just say, be gone with the space. And the answer is you're going to see both. Right. But, hopefully that'll be the first of a series of steps. We know what the president has promised, and our understanding is that, that we'll see it. But we've heard this before. We heard it with Uncle Joe Biden. We've heard it from Chuck Schumer. I just,
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see what
No,
happens.
but I meant ultimately, how do you sort of balance the desire to want to share the things that you're seeing with sort of the understanding that we've seen things get close, very, very close before. And if it doesn't happen, it's not ultimately,
Well, my rule of thumb is I don't say anything until I see it reported elsewhere.
okay.
I just try not to be, I don't want to be the guy that fucks it up or speaks out
Sure.
of turn. There's been situations, I won't name them specifically, but recently where there was a rumor that went around that was actually something that we were working on that didn't come to pass, but was about to come to pass, but got pushed. But somebody had leaked it because somebody got a call asking about it. And it's like, wasn't me. But you don't want to, loose lips sink ships. And I do know that at least amongst a lot of the guys who are working at the USCR and elsewhere have said, let's not talk about anything until there's something actually to point to that's real. So I've tried to do more of that because it hasn't helped, leaning into things, because it just creates this hopium that has been repeatedly algoed or just faded. So anyway, let's talk about Glass House, because
That's fair. I will say, final point on that, I think it ties into the same thing that we talked about at the beginning. I think you can participate in social media in terms of cannabis and sort of cannabis land, but I think it's a good reminder, take things with a grain of salt, understand sources, all those things I think are important. So ultimately people are sharing their best information, and that's it. So putting a pin on that. But yes, let's turn to Glass House.
But here, before, one more point.
A
It
pin on a
doesn't
pin.
matter what opinion you have,
Yes.
right? It matters that you operate under the auspice of honesty, trust, and respect, right? Like, you can disagree, but there is a way in which you
Sure.
communicate with other people, right? At least there's a way that I like to communicate with other people. And if you're unwilling or unable to do that, and especially if you're unwilling and able to do that, and then feel the need to, not do anything else to try to help move the cause forward, then I think you need to look at yourself rather than at somebody else. So now we can move on.
There we go. That sounds good. All right. Well, then on to the next thing that I think we have talked about quite a lot on the Nooner so far, but we haven't had a chance to talk with you about it. But talking about sort of the recent, semi-recent ICE raids that we saw in California. I know it's still somewhat getting digested, and I think that you can't speak for the company specifically, but would love to kind of talk about what you make on it around the fact that it happened at a cannabis farm, but again wasn't really about shutting down what is this Schedule 1 federally illegal drug. What do you kind of make of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not good, no matter how you slice it, particularly the timing, as we talked about earlier, coming right, as the MAGA influencers and Tyson and all the momentum that we had regarding rescheduling, then all of a sudden you run into this on a last Thursday afternoon. To your point, still being digested. We don't advise the company. We used to. We don't. That termed out a couple of years ago. But I do remain close with Graham Farrar, who I consider a friend. I wouldn't. Well,
Sure.
let me reframe this. My initial reaction was that this was more about immigration and about Gavin Newsom than it was about cannabis, and I felt better about that when Trump didn't mention cannabis when he was talking about the situation, right? And that was a omission that I thought was interesting, because it would have been very easy for him to say, working in cannabis as a way to dig it in.
I think that's true. I will say, so from looking at kind of the fallout from it, setting aside, I think you can't fully set aside the political element, but setting aside everything else that kind of taps into, but just focusing on it from a cannabis lens. I had seen, the White House had reposted a post talking about, these people were not good people because they were working in cannabis versus they're not picking strawberries or something that's, I guess, wholesome or whatever. So I think there was sometimes a bit of an edge
There
there.
was some after, but not from Now, I'm talking about the president's initial response to it,
Okay.
right? And subsequently, yes, they did point to, these aren't strawberries, it's cannabis, and you had some pile-ons. And the issue, to be frank, is that those videos are going to continue to play. I mean, those are evergreen videos. I was watching, I walked into my bedroom last, what was it, 2 nights ago, I think. My wife was watching it. I don't think she was watching. She just had turned on the TV, and there was, Hannity was on, and it was the lead story, and it was for 25 minutes. They played videos of the raids, and those videos are going to be evergreen examples of how the left-wing radicals are standing in the way of immigration reform. That's the soundbite from the right, from those videos. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm saying that that's what politically is going to play, probably through the midterms. That's the downside. I think, if I had to put on my optimist hat, or if I wanted to put on my optimist hat, I would say that there are laws that regulate publicly traded companies. If glass house operations have been negatively impacted, I would imagine they have a disclosure obligation to report that to their investors. So the situation is fluid, certainly, and obviously it's subject to change. But no news is good news in terms of the fact that the farm's still humming. I can say personally, knowing Graham as I do, I don't see him as a Dr. Evil, type of villain that has some dastardly designs on exploiting labor. I've been to the farm. I've spoken with their teams. It's a family. They don't look at themselves as big cannabis. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe California minimum wage is much higher than most other places in the country. And I just think we need to let the facts play themselves out before you start voting in the court of public opinion. Like I said, subject to change. I get why, there's been a lot of anger and venom, both from inside the industry and from investors, right? I get it. I hear it all the time. It's nonstop. It's around the clock. I'm like an antenna for this shit, I guess.
Sure.
But at the same time, I understand why the company wouldn't say something, right? For instance, what are they going to say? That they're going to pre-announce their quarter and talk about how much money they made, and then then you're going to have everyone jumping on them and saying, on the back of slave labor, even though I don't think that's true. I think when the facts come out, I think if they had, if there was reason for the company to be shut down, I feel like we would have heard or seen. The last reports I've heard were news reports saying that none of these charges have been, if I make sure I get this straight, excuse me. It was, let's see, this was in Fortune yesterday. Authorities declined to share the warrant for the operation. The administration has released no additional information about the children, including their ages or what they were doing on the property when authorities arrived. DHS has not provided details to back up its claim of possible trafficking or other abuse, and the company has not been charged with anything. It is unclear if any of the minors were the children of farm workers at the site, or if they came to the U.S. with that adult. So my point being, I don't know what I don't know.
Of course.
But I would imagine if there was a smoking gun of child slave labor, that there would have been a hiccup in their operation. To my knowledge, based on the fact there's been no communications otherwise, and this is either going to be a PR nightmare that passes with the next news cycle, or there's more here that that remains to be seen. But I'm leaving my benefit of the doubt with Glass House. As of right now, at this point in time, July 16th, stock's at $5. Stock was at $9 last Thursday. I know there's a lot of accusations and there's a lot of venom and anger. I would like to see the facts before I make, before I condemn the operation. So
yes, I think that's very reasonable, and I do think,
and everybody should make that determination for themselves.
Of course. I will say also, I think in cannabis stocks, I think things can move very quickly, especially when there's less information. I think they just tend to trade uh, more intensely up or down on news or rumors or things like that. So again, not surprised. I think looking at it in the longer term can share a different picture. But yeah, I think something still that's being digested. It does feel like it's something more tied into the administration's kind of increasing or ratcheting up their aggressive push on these kind of raids. And I think the big beautiful bill, I think funding ICE very strongly, rather than I think specific to cannabis or even specific to Glass House ultimately. So
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's like I said at the beginning, there's nothing good about this, right? Like, there's no lipstick on the pig, unless unless that good is the ability to buy a great operation that's done nothing wrong. If that is proven, right, remains to be seen, and it's going to take time. Basically, half off from where it was last week, right? That's like the only good thing that could come of this, if you're an investor. But for the families that have been traumatized, for the individual who passed away, for the reputational damage that it did at a time where the space had real momentum. It really felt like there was a bit of a groundswell for a second half sort of move. And again, I don't think anything's changed there.
Yeah.
But in terms of, getting a right hook across the jaw that you didn't see coming, like, this was that. So I think everybody's sort of, a little bit,
shaken. Yeah.
Right? And we're a couple days after the fact. But my only point is, let's let the facts show themselves. I do understand that, and this is not so much about plausible deniability as it is about just the way that these businesses operate, that, there are third party labor, operations that fund, that supply rather, these employees or these workers for the farms. And it's not just for cannabis. And Glasshouse, by the way, has, in their farms, other produce other than cannabis, by the way. So, you have a situation here where, it remains to be seen. I don't force, I just, my personal, like, put a gun in my head. I don't see Graham, knowing Graham as I do, being the guy that, is some sinister, slave driver. I think they operate with best practices and pride themselves on it. The headlines are screaming differently. One of the two things is going to change, right? Like, does the federal government want to make an example out of them, or is that sort of, they got what they needed with the footage and the headlines, and now it's on to the next? I don't know the answer to that, and that's the risk in the stock, right? Because you can sit here and say, like, they have a fiduciary to tell us if something has changed, and they haven't, so obviously nothing has changed. And then we can turn up and say Glass House halted, and I'm just saying. So there is risk here, but I don't know the extent of it. I do know that California controls their license, so I would be surprised if California just suddenly turned around and said, we're yanking your license over this. But there's hair on the story, even if it's perceptually, and it's got to work through that. So that's why the stock is trading 40% off, from where it was. And, that's just, what we have to navigate. I was talking to John DeCourcy last night for a while. He's on vacation this week. He just joined them as IR, a couple of months ago. I'm like, boy, you really picked a hell of a time to get into IR, my man.
Yes, that is true. I will say, no investor has perfect information. That's obviously where the risk can come up. I think in the short term, you can see a lot of sort of froth and confusion. Ultimately, I think you have to look to signs where, you would expect to see disclosures if something were substantially off. Again, have to wait and see. But yeah, ultimately that comes down to, I guess, the risks of investing, but understanding why you invested in things and kind of how they operate, the culture, all those things as well. I did see a question here, which was interesting. I don't know these specific numbers, but JC on X is saying a high percentage of people in that raid were picked up. And how could it be so many people? I wonder if it is one of those things, kind of like what you were tying in with, if if they're contracting in labor a lot of the time. It's
Yeah, I mean, but that's my understanding. That's how it was explained to me. I don't necessarily know if that's a get out of jail free card, but I was even told that you're not allowed to defer somebody who is part of this labor agreement if they look like their image on their security card. So you can't turn away somebody. I was told this. I don't know if it's true that are part of these labor organizations that contract out farm labor. Now, I also know, and I think this was posted just before. I might as well see if I can find it because I had heard this directly yesterday regarding somebody had said to me, what is this going to do to their cogs if they've been operating on the backs of slave labor effectively. And again, this was coming from an angry person. But I believe California minimum wage is 16.50, U.S. minimum wage is 7.25.
It's crazy.
So even if you hear rate to minimum wage, labor costs are higher than anyone as it is. Have your own view. This was, I'm just reading it off. So that was to me one of the concerns raised is like, they're going around talking about their cogs, but what if one of the biggest inputs of cogs is labor and that's going to all of a sudden uptick? That doesn't sound like that's in the cards, but like I said, very, very fluid situation. I know you wanted to get to hemp
No, no.
in Pennsylvania too. I don't know if we have time, but I'm game if you are.
We can roll through some quick things at the end there, but yeah, I think it's interesting, like you're saying, California having a much higher minimum wage. I wonder if we do see these happen in other areas of the country where it's lower. So it's hard to tell. I mean, how they specifically are affected, the industry, all these things. I think just agriculturally, if these rates kind of continue or pick up. Also, Jimmy's question. I think thanks for putting your comment in. I don't think that. I mean, paying the minimum wage wouldn't be the worst if it's that higher minimum wage. I think. I don't think, Todd, that you were spinning it as they would only.
No, I'm just saying, I personally don't think that they are,
Sure.
usurping the laws. I think, yeah, I would be surprised knowing Graham,
Mhm.
but I've
Yeah.
been surprised before. But I just think we want to see the facts before,
Yeah.
you start indicting people.
Perfectly
Uh,
said. That sounds
yeah,
good. I just want to clear that up just to make sure that that was clear. All
yeah.
right. Yeah, I know we do have limited time, just kind of hitting through, because I think those were the main things to focus on that have been kind of current, but did want to just check in across hemp and maybe even honestly Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
What are sort of the key things to focus in on those fronts?
I mean, the hemp stuff in the special session on the 21st is going to help to, I was surprised, but not necessarily disappointed. And to be honest, there are people within the industry, the cannabis industry, who were very happy to see this move to a special session, thinking that it creates an opportunity to really, set up some legitimate framework around hemp. What do I expect to see? Things like age gating, marketing restrictions to children, perhaps synthetics. But at the end of the day, we're talking about this is semantics, right? If hemp has a certain amount of THC, then it's cannabis, right? You could tell me that I'm Charlie all day, but I'm Todd,
Mhm.
right? But the reality is that this is about if you wanted if and maybe this is where it lands, up to a 10 milligram low dose. You can go edibles and you can do drinks, and everything else goes through cannabis. I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but I think it's a slippery slope when you start to carve out things. I don't think that, obviously there's legislation, and now it's supposed to take a year before it kicks in. That would effectively ban all hemp federally, intoxicating hemp, I should say, federally, leaving the industrial use cases in place. That remains to be seen where that goes. But I think that as we get back, two things. One, I think, perversely, the hemp, this hemp period has opened the category to a whole new host of people, and I think that's a positive. I think that we just need to get to a single regulatory construct for cannabinoids, and if it's about dosage, being that that gate between cannabis and hemp, so be it. And with regard to Pennsylvania, I saw another article out today that they're pushing. I was told that there's very much the intention to try to get this in. It might bleed into September even, but that this is something that they want to see get done. So we've heard that before too.
That's true.
But that certainly would be good for the space if we got Pennsylvania on board.
Yes, definitely agree there. We'll definitely be digging into that in a little more depth with Trent Wolowek from Jushi tomorrow. So just a heads up, if you have any questions on Pennsylvania, we'll be kind of digging in a little bit deeper there. I did also see a question from Sonic Yogi kind of relating to hemp a little bit, but also kind of the illicit market at large as well. I think it is true. It's the same story that we've talked about for a long time. It's difficult for companies that are, compliant, state legal, all these things to compete. I think with, if you are not a bad actor, but not following the rules or kind of on your own, less taxes, all those different things.
It's not even that though. It's a safety issue. It's VapeGate 2.0. I mean, and that's what it comes down to, because you don't know what you're putting in your body. I mean, I got two 21-year-old kids. They're not kids anymore. I got two 21-year-old children. They're not children anymore. Our son and daughter, our oldest children are 21. Mm-hmm. And I give them what they need, because I don't want them going out there getting, stuff that might be cheaper or whatever it is. And, I think as these markets converge and pricing converges, you're going to see a lot more volume and a lot cheaper product and a happier consumer. I think it's going to happen. It certainly has been a hell of a journey. It's going to make a hell of a fucking movie one day. But I don't think anybody's going to believe it when they see it. So.
That is true. All right. Well, then I guess to round us out and kind of wrap us up, do you have any sort of good, bad, and ugly in terms of where we are right now? That puts us more on the negative side, but good and ugly maybe is the way to do it of where we are.
I think the good is that by all indications, we continue to march forward toward federal reform. Mm-hmm. And I understand that people aren't going to believe it till they see it, and that's fine. It's probably better. But all indications are it continues, with the asterisk that things happen in this universe, whether it is, we
were talking about earlier, the Fed chair, Powell,
Fed chair, or Jeffrey Epstein, or whatever it is, or is that, is that good for does that create an opportunity from this? Who knows? So there are those natural asterisks, but I think the good part is that the conversations that we've been having with the White House and the proxies and the surrogates, from every indication, have been positive. Been entirely more engaged than the Biden administration ever was, and Kamala ever was. She didn't even return calls. Mm-hmm. So through that lens, I think we have a lot to be thankful for. The bad, obviously, is the status quo, and the fact that I think pretty much every institutional investor is tapped out, and we're at the mercy of the algos in an otherwise liquid world, right? That's the bad. The ugly is if this continues. If we get through, this year without any progress, then, I think it gets, really, it becomes a real issue. Not that it's not a real issue now, but I think that, the space has always been a bit of a call option on federal reform. I think the nuance is that, 5 years in, the boiling toad has taken on a lot of debt and a lot of tax provision uncertainties, and, and then, the kicker, the intoxicating hemp, bug guarding that growth. So that's the ugly. But as we start to address these issues, as we started to say, hemp, on the federal level and at the state level being addressed, we think scheduling, which will stop the clock on 280E, and then, we can start to litigate or negotiate whatever it is before that. And then if the banking and other elements that we hear are on the heels of this come through, all of a sudden, we're looking at a much different world. Not to say that it's going to be the same type of recoveries that would have happened if you got this 5 years ago when there was zero interest rates. Yep. That's not the world we live in, and we can only look forward. So we're doing so, trying to stay positive and remain thankful for the blessings that we have, like the health of our family and our dogs.
Yep, I think that's fantastic. Well said. Overall, definitely appreciate you taking the time, Todd. I think it's great to kind of check in and get a little bit of insight into kind of where we are in the world of cannabis. It's quickly developing, obviously, in some areas not quickly enough, but hopefully we see that soon. So really appreciate it. Everyone, thanks for joining. Really appreciate the questions and the comments as well, of course. And we hope to see you next week. But join us tomorrow with Trent Wolovac, and we'll be talking about Pennsylvania and Virginia. So stay tuned then. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you then. Thanks. Bye.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at advisorshares.com.